My husband was in the garage, refinishing the old dining table, the one we bought at an estate sale the first year we were married, when his cell phone lit up on the kitchen counter where he'd left it charging. I wasn't snooping. I was standing right there, washing out my coffee mug. The name on the screen said Amber W., and the message preview read 4 words before it locked, thinking about you constantly. I set down my mug slowly. Griffin and I had been married for 34 years. We'd raised 2 children in this house. I knew every creak of every floorboard. I knew the sound of his breathing when he was asleep versus when he was pretending to sleep. I knew the exact way his voice changed when he was about to lie, a slight rise at the end of sentences that had no business rising. And I knew that no woman named Amber W. had any legitimate reason to be thinking about my husband constantly. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the garage. Instead, I stood very still in my own kitchen and thought about all the small things I'd filed away over the past 2 months and never wanted to look at directly. The hotel points statement that arrived in the mail. Griffin handled all the finances, so it wasn't unusual that it was addressed to him. But I'd glanced at it before setting it on his desk and seen a charge for the Marriott downtown on a Tuesday night when he'd told me he was playing cards at his friend's place. The cologne he started wearing again after years of dismissing it as too strong. The way he'd gotten particular about his phone lately. Always face down on the table, password changed without explanation. I'd convinced myself there were reasons for all of it. At 63 years old, after 3 decades of building a life together, I still found it easier to explain things away than to face what I already knew in my bones. But thinking about you constantly is not a message you explain away. I unlocked his phone. The passcode was our wedding anniversary, July 14, 1990. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. The conversation thread with Amber W. was long. Too long. I didn't read all of it. I didn't need to. I read enough to understand the shape of what had been happening. Dinners after his consulting meetings. A weekend, she believed, was a trip for one of his hobby conventions. Messages that made it clear this wasn't new and wasn't casual. The most recent message, the one I'd seen on the lock screen. Thinking about you constantly. When can I see you again? I thought for a moment. Then I typed back from his phone, slow and deliberate. Come over tonight. My wife is visiting her sister this weekend. I've been lonely. I hit send. I watched the blue check marks appear. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to my own phone, and put his phone back exactly as I'd found it. Screen down, plugged into the charger. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought they'd shake. But something had shifted inside my chest. The long, sick uncertainty of the past 2 months had condensed into something harder and colder, and hard, cold things don't tremble. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed, and gave myself exactly 10 minutes to feel everything I was feeling. I cried. Quiet, controlled crying, the kind you learn when you've raised babies you don't want to wake. I thought about the life we'd built together, the difficult early years in our small apartment off Route 9, the way we'd stayed up late making lists of everything we wanted to give our children, the way he used to reach for my hand in church without me asking. I grieved all of that. I gave it 10 minutes. Then I stood up, washed my face, and went back downstairs to start planning. I knew she would come. When a young woman believes she's been invited to an empty house, she comes. Pride makes her come. The same pride that lets her believe she deserves what belongs to someone else. While Griffin sanded wood in the garage, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and thought about my friend Selma. She'd been a family law attorney for 30 years before she retired last spring, and she was the sharpest person I'd ever known. I'd texted her 2 days ago. Not everything, just enough. I think Griffin is having an affair. I'm gathering information. She wrote back, don't confront him until you have everything, and don't move any money. I'd done neither. That evening, after dinner, Griffin settled into his recliner watching the news. I sat across from him with a book I wasn't reading. I watched him the way you watch something you love that's become dangerous, carefully, from a distance, noting every small movement. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. Griffin looked up from the television with genuine confusion on his face. You expecting someone? No, I said, are you? He looked back at the screen, probably a package. I put down my book. I'll get it. I walked to the front door at the speed of someone with nowhere important to be. I could feel his eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I opened the door. She was younger than I'd imagined, late 20s, maybe 30 at most. Pretty in the way that takes effort. Blow-dried hair, heels on a Thursday evening, a silk blouse with 2 buttons undone. She was holding a bottle of red white wine by the neck like a peace offering. When she saw me, the color drained from her face so completely it was like watching a screen go dark. She didn't speak. Neither did I for a moment. I simply looked at her and let the silence do what silence does to guilty people. I think I have the wrong address, she finally managed. No, I said pleasantly. You have the right address. You're looking for my husband. I stepped back from the doorway. Come in. We were just sitting down. I said it the way you say come in to a welcome guest, warmly, with a smile that held absolutely no warmth at all. She had no way to refuse. She'd walked into a trap that looked like a living room, and the door was already open. I heard Griffin get up from his recliner. She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the entryway tile, the tile we'd laid ourselves the summer we turned 50, and decided to do a renovation project together. She clutched the wine bottle with both hands now. "Who is it, hon?" Griffin called. He came around the corner and stopped. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at the floor. His face went through 5 expressions in 2 seconds, and none of them were innocent. "Amber brought wine," I said, taking the bottle gently from her hands as if it were perfectly natural, as if this were a dinner party I'd arranged. "How thoughtful. Sit down, Amber. Sit anywhere that's comfortable." I gestured to the wingback chair across from the couch, the seat that put her facing both of us. Then I went to the kitchen. I could hear nothing from the living room. That was exactly right. The two of them alone with nothing to say to each other and everything to be afraid of. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet where we kept our good glasses, the crystal ones we'd received as a wedding gift 34 years ago, still in beautiful condition. I poured 2 glasses of the wine, one for Griffin, one for myself. Then I put the bottle back in the cabinet. For her, I found a paper cup left over from the last time our grandchildren visited, the kind with cartoon characters printed on it, bright orange with little dinosaurs marching around the rim. I filled it with tap water from the sink and set it on a small tray alongside our crystal glasses. I carried the tray back to the living room. I set Griffin's glass in front of him. I set mine on the end table beside my seat, and I placed the paper cup, the little orange cup with the cartoon dinosaurs, on the coffee table in front of Amber without a word of explanation, without a flicker of apology. She looked at the cup. She looked at our glasses. She understood. A flush crept up her neck. She didn't touch the water. "So," I said, settling into my seat and crossing my ankles, "how do you two know each other?" Griffin started to speak. I raised one finger, just one, and he stopped. "I'd like to hear it from Amber." She told a story about work, consulting projects, professional networking. She used the word colleague twice. She stared at a fixed point on the coffee table and delivered her version of events with the desperate competence of someone improvising under oath. I listened. I nodded occasionally. I sipped my wine. When she finished, I said, "That's interesting. Because when I was planning our anniversary party with the caterer last month, 35 years, we're doing something special. Griffin never once mentioned Amber from work. And yet here you are on a Thursday evening with wine, knowing exactly where we live." Silence. "Griffin," I continued, turning to my husband, "didn't you say something at dinner last week about keeping professional boundaries? That it's so easy for lines to blur when you work closely with someone?" I tilted my head. I thought that was such a wise thing to say. He looked like a man searching for an exit in a room that had none. "I thought so too," I said pleasantly, and turned back to Amber. I let my voice become almost conversational. "You know, I was telling my friend Selma the other day, she's a retired family attorney, 30 years of practice. I was telling her how remarkable it is, the stories you hear. The amount of detailed knowledge some people develop about married men. Their schedules, their habits, their private little complaints. How long have you known about Griffin's bad knee, Amber?" She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "His left knee. He's favored it for years. It kept him from doing the hiking trails we used to love." I tilted my head. "You seem like someone who pays close attention. Have you noticed it?" The question was deliberately absurd, and we both knew it. I was taking the weapon away. Every intimate detail she knew about my husband, The things that made her feel chosen, privy, special. I was reducing to inventory, trivia. He was my husband. I had 34 years of him. She had a knee observation and a bottle of wine she hadn't been invited to bring. I should probably go, Amber said. She started to rise. Please sit. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She sat back down. I'd like to show you something, I said, since you came all this way. I took my phone from my pocket and opened the screenshot. I placed it face up on the coffee table between us. She leaned forward. She read it. I watched her read it. The message she'd sent, the reply she'd received, the invitation that had brought her here tonight. Come over tonight. My wife is visiting her sister this weekend. I've been lonely. She looked up at me slowly. I sent that, I said, from his phone, while he was sanding furniture in the garage and had no idea I was standing 10 feet away. I let that settle. I've been here the entire time, Amber. I have been here for 34 years. I was never at my sister's. The room went absolutely silent. Outside, a car passed on the street. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked twice and stopped. Griffin put his head in his hands. Amber's composure broke apart the way things break when they were never as solid as they appeared. The blow-dried hair, the heels, the silk blouse, none of it had anywhere left to stand. She looked very young suddenly, young and cornered and deeply ashamed. I spoke without raising my voice. The difference between you and me is that I was never under any illusion about what this was. You thought you were walking into an empty house. But this house has never been empty. I've lived in it for 34 years, and every photograph on that wall, every dish in that cabinet, every piece of furniture in this room. That's time. That's my time. That's us. And you wandered into the middle of it with a bottle of wine and a plan. She was crying now, quietly, with her hands in her lap, not looking at either of us. I'm not angry with you, I said, and it was almost entirely true. You didn't make any vows to me. He did. I looked at Griffin directly for the first time all evening. But I want you to understand, clearly before you leave my home tonight, what you walked into and what you'll be walking away from. I stood. Amber stood. I walked her to the front door at the same unhurried pace I'd used to answer it. At the threshold, I stopped her with one hand on her arm. Gently, the way you stop someone to tell them they've left something behind. One more thing, I said quietly. The next time you're tempted to reach for a man who wears a wedding ring, I want you to hold on to this feeling. This exact feeling, right now, in this doorway. Keep it somewhere you can find it. She nodded. She couldn't speak. She walked down our porch steps, and I watched her go until she reached her car, and then I closed the door. I stood in the entryway with my hand on the door for a moment. Behind me, the house was full of 34 years of accumulated life. I turned around. Griffin was standing in the living room doorway. His eyes were red. His posture had collapsed entirely. He looked 63 years old and every single year of it. Sit down, I told him, and tell me the truth, not the version where you minimize it, not the version where I'm supposed to understand. I need the actual truth. He sat. I went to the sideboard and opened the bottom drawer, the one he never touched because it held household records and old receipts and the administrative paperwork of our life together. I pulled out the folder I'd put together over the past week. Bank statements. The hotel charge, a credit card bill with a restaurant I'd never been to twice in 1 month, always for 2 people. A printout of the phone records showing the calls. I laid them on the coffee table in front of him, one by one. He broke before I finished. He cried the way men cry when they've been caught, rather than when they're truly sorry. Heaving and shaking, reaching for my hand, which I moved away. He said things like it meant nothing. And I don't know what I was thinking. And you are the only person who has ever mattered to me, and every sentence landed in the silence between us, like something thrown at glass that had already shattered. How long, I said. Almost a year, he whispered. I'm so sorry, I'm going to stay at Selma's tonight, I said. I'll have what I need for a few days. You're going to stay here, and you're not going to move any money, or contact your brother about attorneys, or do anything at all, except sit with what you've done. Do you understand me? He looked up. He wanted to argue. 34 years of habit kept pulling him toward fixing things, toward the assumption that I would ultimately be reasoned with. Griffin. My voice was level. I've already spoken to Selma. I've had this folder for a week. I need you to understand the position you're in. He understood. I packed a bag. It took me 12 minutes. After 3.5 decades of building a life in one place, 12 minutes was all it took to carry out what I needed. I found that clarifying in a way I hadn't expected. Selma was waiting in her kitchen when I arrived. She took one look at my face and poured 2 glasses of bourbon without asking a single question. We sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours. I told her everything. She made notes on a legal pad. She reviewed the folder and said I had more than enough. "What do you actually want?" she asked finally. "Not what you think you're supposed to want. What do you want?" I thought about it for a real moment. "I want what's mine," I said. 34 years is a long time to build something. I want my fair share of it, and I want to be free." She nodded once. "Then that's what will get you." The divorce took 4 months. It was not friendly, but it was clean. Griffin hired someone who specialized in making things difficult, which told me something I'd perhaps already suspected, that there was a version of him that had always been more interested in protecting himself than in being fair. It didn't matter. Selma was better. The house sold in October. We'd paid it off years ago, and the neighborhood had appreciated enough that the sale number surprised us both. Half of that figure, deposited into my account on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, was the largest sum of money I had ever seen attached to my name alone. There were other things I hadn't arranged but didn't discourage. Griffin had sat on the board of our county's literacy foundation for 11 years. A position he was genuinely proud of, one of the good things about him that had always been real. When the board chair, who had known us both through church for decades, learned through the ordinary channels of a small community that our marriage had ended because of a year-long affair with a woman 30 years younger, Griffin was asked to step down at the next quarterly meeting. He did it quietly. The alternative was making a scene, and he knew better than to make one. I heard about it from a mutual friend a week later. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter, a settling, like when a level finally reads flat after you've adjusted it 100 times and thought you never would. I found an apartment with east-facing windows in the living room that filled the place with light every morning. The building had a rooftop garden where residents could reserve a plot. I took a pottery class I'd been meaning to take for 15 years. I had dinner with my daughter twice a month. On alternating Sunday afternoons, I watched my grandchildren and fed them something I'd made from scratch and felt the specific satisfaction of being the grandmother who shows up without fail, which is the very best thing a grandmother can be. One afternoon, I was sitting on my balcony with a book I was actually reading when a message came through a women's forum I'd joined online, a space where women over 50 talked about everything from recipes to health questions to the harder subjects. Nobody encourages us to discuss out loud. Selma had shared a version of my story there months earlier with all the details changed. I'd given her permission. The message was from a woman in Ohio. She said she'd read my story 3 times. She said she'd been trying to gather the courage to leave her husband for 2 years. And something about my account. Not the confrontation, she said, but the part about standing in the entryway with my hand on the door and deciding to walk forward had finally moved something inside her. She'd made an appointment with an attorney. She wanted to say thank you. I sat with that message for a long time. I thought about the night I stood in my kitchen with a paper cup and a plan. I thought about what it cost and what it returned. I thought about 10 minutes on the edge of a bed I would never sleep in again, giving myself permission to grieve before I got up and got to work. 63 years old, 34 years of marriage, 12 minutes to pack a bag. And one afternoon in good light on a balcony I'd chosen myself, reading a message from a stranger in Ohio, feeling, for the first time in longer than I could calculate, entirely like myself. I wrote back to her. I told her I was glad. I told her that what they don't tell you about beginning again in the second half of your life is that the word over is wrong. It isn't starting over. It's more like a room you've always known was there but never quite found the door to. And once you're standing inside it, you realize the light has been good all along. You were just standing in the wrong part of the house. I still have the paper cup, actually. The little orange one with the cartoon dinosaurs. I rinsed it out that night and left it on the counter, and then, instead of throwing it away, wrapped it in a dish towel and packed it with the things I brought when I moved. Some people keep photographs to remember who they were. I kept a paper cup to remember who I decided to be. It reminds me that dignity doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet choice about which glass you fill and which you don't, made in your own kitchen, in your own time, while the world keeps moving around you. And you've been watching yourself your whole life. You already know what you're worth. That's enough. That has always been enough.